we're solving, and why does this matter? And how does this bring value to students and families, bring value to communities, towns, cities, and so on, and bring value to the state and other constituents in the state, certainly including business employers and so on. So we've tried to spell out a handful of bullets here. I won't go through all of them, but these programs clearly we have 3 programs in the state of Connecticut that have been up and running in a couple of cases for many years that definitely have demonstrated success in the areas of more students being aware of college, more students being prepared in terms of their approach to college, more students going to college, more students graduating from college, and then going to the workforce. There's proven success every step along the line there in terms of existing Promise programs. They all are outcome-based. They all have data that backs up their work and that backs up those results. They are very much community-oriented, community-minded, on multi-layers in terms of families and neighborhoods, in terms of schools, specific individual schools and school systems, in terms of other key partners, city, business, and otherwise. They're very much attuned to and engaged in the communities that they serve. And they also do have broad support from a variety of partners, including not-for-profit businesses, for-profit businesses, foundations, and otherwise. One of the core messages here, and this again begins to get into sort of the marketing of this or the communications around this. These programs keep talent in Connecticut. These programs will make Connecticut not only a more highly educated state and the smartest state, which will be increasingly important to both current and future employers. This is a way of retaining employers in Connecticut and attracting new employers to Connecticut. And that's obviously consistent with the whole economic development, workforce development initiatives and priorities of the state. So it will serve, Promise programs will serve as a clear incentive for people to live and go to school and work in Connecticut. And we all want to see as much of that as possible. In terms of that's some of the key elements in terms of the value proposition and messaging around existing Promise programs. In terms of the expansion of Promise programs, and there's still a lot of work that we all need to do around this. And at this point, I think Kelvin and I are going to ask all of you to weigh in on features of this. We don't need to think of yourselves as operating only in the work groups that you were part of. You certainly helped get us to this point, but now we're going to have to work as a task force to put these things all together. But in terms of the expansion of programs, one of the key elements that we've landed on is to create we've called it here in these notes, some sort of consultancy technical assistance structure that would be available to towns and communities as they're considering and thinking about, or do they want to do a Promise program in their town? And this technical assistance team or consultancy team, we refer to it later in another document that we'll share in a minute as I don't have my own notes, strategic guidance and development team, SGDT, strategic guidance and development team. But this entity would be available to a town as they are considering this to help them look at the requirements, look at some of the key elements, and to really help them get an understanding on, are they ready? Is this really the direction they want to go? And are they ready to consider this? And if in fact the decision is that they are ready and they want to go forward, this team would then continue to help them gather those resources, gather those partnerships, gather those critical elements that we already know from our existing models that are required in order to launch a successful promise program and then sustain a successful promise program. So there would be a lot of pre-work done with towns and communities before they get to the point of launching a promise program. We think that approach will not only help towns and communities be more successful in that work, but also consider, in some cases, maybe this is not what they really want to do, or they don't really have the capacity to do this, and maybe there needs to be a longer lead time or consideration of other alternatives, as opposed to just, sorry, Patricia, go right ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, please.
I'm eager to comment.
No, please, Patricia, yes.
So, as you know, we both helped Waterbury, sharing, our expertise. I've been really involved with Bridgeport Promise that just launched. And one of the things that I think we could do, and what I've been doing, because we've kind of been in the talent realm for a long time, since 2014. So we're pretty advanced and have pretty good practice there. But what I've been doing in the last couple of years is actually creating what I call a consulting corps of our very educated and actually alums. They all have college degrees. Many of them have gone to, business school, grad school. And so, as we think about this consulting corps, I see that you have here, involving alums, but it's a great way for kind of along the sort of lines that Bain has a pro bono, for their younger associates to sort of develop their skill set. But I can definitely see a consulting corps that in fact includes the product, which are our alums who are eager to give back in many different ways. And I don't believe in volunteer. They would have to be paid. But we've been already doing kind of that work. So we really do have an incredible amount of talent that can be marshaled for leveraging and spreading and helping all communities who want to do some form of promise program in their communities.
Yeah. Patricia, thank you for that. Maybe it's not highlighted in here, but clearly the case would be that all of these efforts would utilize Promise Scholar talent. I mean, that's what we're saying. We want businesses of all kinds and organizations of all kinds and municipalities of all kinds to do. And we certainly will model that. One, because it's the right thing to do, but two, because the contributions they are prepared to make. They are really prepared to help deliver the highest quality services, supports, advice, and so on. So definitely, they will be a part of this. No question about it. Thank you.
Hey, Richard,
So
I had a question.
Yeah,
It
please,
says
Paul.
how many programs you think we can open in 5 years, and I also agree 10 might be a little bit ambitious, given depending on how many supports are in place for each town or city, especially after we were able to launch 2 new programs within 4 years. So just wanted to note that might be more like 5 to start with. I don't know, thoughts?
I think we could do 10.
You think we do? Okay.
I
Okay.
think we could do 10.
If
Uh, I do think that, again, what is the state willing to, when I think about the funds that are coming through the state for bioscience, for health, whatever, and so forth and so on, I feel that we should have that investment because it's really innovative. And why wouldn't we do this? So I feel like it's making the case so that we can get equitable funding that really is keeping our folks here. But when I think of one of the things that I don't see here that I feel that we should absolutely put in here is economic development, because as opposed to bricks and mortar. I look at all the apartment buildings going up and the developers, and whenever that discussion about economic development, it's not really talking about talent. It's talking about bricks and mortar. So if we can get our state to invest in talent as we develop that talent, and we are really doing a lot of developing that, if we can get some sort of innovation fund, then I don't see why we couldn't do 10
So,
in 5 years.
And what would the consequence be if we don't reach 10?
Well, I always like to shoot for Mars, really, Jupiter. That's all I'm saying. Think I mean, it's aspirational. I know that in Michigan, we're Kalamazoo. We're about to go to Kalamazoo, and they're doing the Kalamazoo Promise 20 years. But the governor really got on board with that. And really it was sort of challenging communities. So they have at least 10 promise programs in Michigan.
They probably
And
have close to 30.
yes, that's what I'm saying. And so you could have everything from, just FAFSA sessions. I mean, if you do a rubric where it's like emerging, blah, 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 so forth and so on, people are going to be distributed across that range of possibilities. But I think that leadership from the state is critical to being able to reach that. And I know they had more than 10 programs in 5 years.
Okay.
for me,
Savon? Go ahead, Savon.
scale is important, but quality is probably to me more important, because what I look at as, if you, just as we've talked about why support services are so critical, the demoralizing thing besides loss of investment is when you send students to school without the support to succeed and they don't succeed. We are losing them for quite a long time. So that what needs to be built in is an infrastructure that involves, as we've talked about, the superintendent and the mayors, and a buy-in that is going to take some time. So doing it, and it's great to be aspirational, and I'm good with that, but I also think it has to be done well. Because honestly, saying there's a promise program that is not done well isn't serving anyone, right? So that amount will take, I think will take effort. How long did it take to actually get off the ground and do well? And to do well, Waterbury, how long has Bridgeport been in process, right? Those things are going to take time and discussion. So I think it's great to shoot for something and to say, but it's also, and maybe it's saying a range, right? The goal is this to this.
And to those points, that's one of the reasons that we're attracted to this idea of having this strategic guidance and development team or technical assistance team to help communities really think about this, and not just think about it, but really understand what will be needed in order for this to be successful. The idea here is to have more promise programs in more communities in Connecticut, and to have all of them be able to achieve a high level of success and have the foundation that we think will be help to be created by this team being available to them pre-process, early process, and really throughout their initial years. We want to see every one of these be successful. We think this is a key element of that success, is having this team in place. And that, I'm sorry, please go ahead.
I do think it's important. The Promise movement is huge, from those Promise programs that have the full integrated model to other features that aren't quite as integrative. I think we should be careful, because I don't feel like we should be sort of the gatekeepers of what's a true Promise program. We've been criticized in the movement for not being universal, meaning, we fund any and everyone who comes to the table. we set our promise program for what was going to work for our communities, and that is the beauty of these promise programs. They have so many different variations, but I think the end result are the communities want to make sure that their young people are supported in some sort of structured systemic way that probably has some tuition benefit and a range of supports. So I'm very sensitive to making sure that we are inclusive and bring as many communities who want to be there, because people will choose to come in, right? But I don't want us to be the barrier to that.
Right. Absolutely, Patricia. That's not the intention at all. But to that point, also, again, we think that this approach allows for both a model to be available and copyable, but also customization or individualization based on town A wanting a little more of this and town B wanting a little more of that. So it allows for that customization that I think is key. I mean, the three existing promise programs are all different in some ways small, some ways in bigger ways. So again, we think this provides some structure and modeling that is available, and also the opportunity for customization. I think we'll still have to work on terms of what would be a range and what would be a time frame. But I think the guiding principle is to try to make this available to a variety of Connecticut towns and municipalities, and for there to be done with a high degree of success being the goal, and sustainability being the goal. We've gone a little bit further. I'm not going to share that document right now, but we've gone a little bit further in terms of what that consultancy team or that strategic guidance and development team would look like. It's a little bit more detailed. Jeff did a great deal of work on that. Thank you, Jeff, for that. We share that with you all in terms of the documents. I don't think we need to take the time to go through all of that now, but let me just wrap up at least my remarks or this conversation by saying, so what we are asking, or what we are moving toward in terms of asking of the state, in terms of existing programs, for them to support a general support for their integrated models, and to try to come up with a figure based on a per student cost. And we know that the per student cost, or we've estimated that the per student cost for the service pieces, the high school services, the college services, the workforce economic development services that are provided, are somewhere between $3,500 and $4,000 per student. But we know if we also then add in the scholarship cost, it's probably more like $6,000 per student. So one of the things we'll be asking is for the state to support existing programs either on a per student basis or on a percentage of overall budget basis for those existing programs, and to have that be sustained support, not short-term or annual support, but to hopefully have that be sustained support. And number two, for the state to put together, and again, whether this is in a fund or whether this is the state funding this strategic guidance and development team or technical assistance team, but to provide the funding to allow that team to be filled with folks, and then be able to offer those services to communities that want to consider starting a new promise program. That would be a second request for the state. And the third request for the state would be to provide the funding to then create a Connecticut Promise program. I'm not sure, Kelvin, maybe you can speak to this, but whether the idea of what the structure of that might look like, or what the extent of that might look like, I don't have that figure in my head, though.
Yeah, so thank you, Richard. Thank you all. A couple of things associated with that, which is where it goes into the financial modeling for this. So Richard and I have been going a little bit back and forth on this, but we're going to engage in a conversation with the Office of Fiscal Analysis for the General Assembly, who is going to create and support some modeling so that we have a sense in terms of what that might look like connected to the leveraging points that we want to influence, right? So if we want to shift the trajectory of the state being an exporter of post-secondary enrollment to other states, what does that mean relative to the financial model? If we want more students geared in a particular direction connected to the economy of the state or the labor market or whatever it may mean, all of those factors influence what that might look like. And of course, you also have to be mindful of the other programs in place, right? Because we know that we have PACT, for example, here in the States. So what's the connection between the two? Will also matter greatly. So those are the different elements that we are trying to think about. And of course, this is not just going to be on the work group that I'm leading, but obviously comes back to all of us for consideration and discussion.
Just a comment. It would be helpful, as the work of the two subgroups takes place. I think this is really critical to garner support and to make sure we bring all stakeholders along with us, is any kind of making sure that we have, you know, what is it, at the bottom, footnotes around the methodology. So for instance, in terms of how the other work group, the support work group, came up with 3,500 or 4,000 per student, what were the assumptions in that methodology to come up with that? Because I think that's critical to be able to garner support and rationale support for that. And I assume that we will do the same. How do we come, if it's 50 million, if it's 20 million, or, whatever it's going to be, those details are important to garner support and help bring as many folks along in our rationale and making the case.
Yep, important points. I'll repeat again. I want to give everybody a chance to pose any questions or share anything from this, but I just want to say again, linchpins here will be that this is good for the state of Connecticut. This will recognize the talent that exists in Connecticut. This will keep that talent in Connecticut. This will connect that talent in Connecticut to businesses and organizations and the state that desperately need that talent pipeline. And this will be a key part of realizing the economic development goals of the state of Connecticut. And I don't want this to only be viewed as an economic development imperative, if you will, but it is an economic development imperative for the state of Connecticut, and we need to position it that way. It is much more than that, we know, and its impact and ripples are far-reaching beyond that. But we will make sure that in the value proposition that those things are emphasized. Let me just stop here then for a second and just, Mona, I want to give you a chance, Jeff, Dan, Ayana, others that have joined. I want to give everybody a chance to comments, thoughts, questions. This is your time.
And Richard, if I can add, we would particularly welcome feedback on the documents themselves. So if you have directed feedback or non-negotiables in your mind or items that we really should be incorporating in our thinking, I would suggest that this might be the time to do that as well.
Yep.
Well, the documents, where would the documents be for like public comment? If since the public is watching this, at least some folks are watching it, but it would be great that if we can get some comment back, maybe not in this meeting, but just comments in general or questions.
Absolutely. Yeah. Kelvin, Megan, do you have an answer? Well, in terms of documents for public comment?
Yeah, my suggestion would be in this particular instance is that the task force collects its full view of this, and then eventually these documents become part of the higher ed committee docket. and will be, put out for extensive comment and feedback during the hearing and lighting process. So it will be rather public from that perspective, and people will have the opportunity to provide very much a very direct opportunity to provide feedback within that process.
Let me give folks, anybody have anything they want to offer at this point? Questions, comments, suggestions? Please.
I just wanted to ask the college folks to comment specifically, like what's not in here so much is the importance of college partnerships. So like as we talk about a Connecticut Promise, so how they view it and what's key for them for success in this, I think that's really important input.
Mona, Catherine?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk on that. Certainly, I think that's going to vary by college, and so that's something that we have to consider, right? The availability of supports at each individual institution is going to be different, and so like how from a full program perspective, how do we make sure that the students are getting the same supports at each of those schools? So is that up to the team on the state side that's monitoring the program to make sure that that's happening? Is that up to the schools and colleges? Is there some agreement that's in place that says these are the supports that you have to provide to students who fall into this particular programming? I think that's going to be different. I know at the University of Hartford, for example, we have a professional first year advising program for students. And so at least in that first year, they're getting a lot of support. We've got other programs specific to underrepresented students in a lot of ways. And so I feel comfortable with making sure that we're meeting the standards that you've talked about in terms of wraparound supports, but I don't know that all schools feel that way or have the staffing available to do that. And so then how does the state support that? Is something that you probably want to consider as you think about this.
So if I can ask a question relative to that, so what you're suggesting is perhaps not a state support mechanism, but rather what would guidance look like from the perspective of the experience of folks to institutions that might be supporting Promise Scholars across the state? Might be one way of thinking about it as well.
Correct, exactly. So like you, as part of your group's work, you mentioned the student supports, so advisoring and mentoring and bridge programs and all of that. How does each individual school within the state have those programs, right? So do they all have those programs? I don't know the answer to that. I think many do, but maybe not all.
And you're mentioning and highlighting a standard of
Correct.
support and service across.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. If a student is selected to be in the Connecticut Promise program and there is scholarship dollars, obviously persistence is the most important part. So is persistence going to be different at each individual school? And if so, how does that impact the investment in this particular program?
That's a really good point. Mona, how about your thoughts?
What I'm thinking about is really the way some institutions have partnered with the existing programs. And what has been great about that is as the programs have come online, not all at once, that allowed us, as new programs were developed, to assess whether we could afford to offer the same partnership arrangements as new programs were started. Once we're at a point where it's a statewide program, when I think about even the internal services that we provide, such as a point of contact specifically for Promise Scholars who choose to interact with those specific people, if the statewide program is successful and large, I don't know. I mean, clearly it will take more than just two people to be the go-to people. If we're looking for sponsorships from across the state, in addition to whatever the state would be providing, then that's also just something worth considering that we can't necessarily, it's a possibility we can't partner with everyone. And I'm just thinking about the institutions who currently partner with the individual programs offering certain benefits to Promise scholars. So that's just kind of a lot of what's going through my mind at this point.
Yeah, this is a big question arising from scale, right? Scale is going
Yeah.
to raise all kinds of additional demands, and considerations. Thank you for that, Mona. Yeah.
Yeah, and if it's like maybe the partnership piece won't be a thing in the future, and will simply support the Promise scholars the way we would any entering cohort of students, but we wouldn't partner and commit funding to those scholars who come to our institution. And how might that be viewed if we don't do what we've done for the four current or the three existing programs and the fourth that's about to come online?
Yep. Other comments, questions, thoughts? These are important.
Richard, I noticed in the working group meeting notes, one of the items for consideration or other issues is about whether the programs that currently exist or, support for current programs would have a need component to it. And so I think that's an interesting point. So Promise programs right now don't have a need component, right? Most of the programs. So yeah, scaling that or continued support, and where is that threshold, right? Because we know that there are students we know that students within the state of Connecticut and across the nation who are meeting, federal Pell Grant guidelines based on their family's adjusted gross income, are getting supported at many institutions at very high levels already. So, is there another group just outside of that Pell eligible range that could potentially be supported if you do consider need as a threshold for that? Just something to think
Are
about.
you saying as determined by FAFSA?
Yeah.
Because there is definitely need that folks get who may not be getting Pell, but
Correct.
the cost of the institution is 50,000, and any family making 100 probably isn't going to get any Pell, but they're definitely going to get some sort of need-based aid.
And that might be true at some institutions and not true at others. And so that, again, is something to consider. But even beyond that, right? Let's say an institution that doesn't have a very high cost of attendance, just because they're not receiving Pell eligibility based on their family's adjusted gross income does not mean that the family has ability to pay out of pocket or ability to pay at all, right? Does that mean then the student is turning to federal student loans? And is this an opportunity for that particular group as well? So what I mean by that is without using future standards, so 26, 27 FAFSA standards, students who have a student aid index based on the results of the FAFSA at like 6, 7, 8, 9,000, those are still really high need families that are getting no federal Pell Grant funds, no federal SEOG grant funds. And so even if they are going to, let's say they're not part of the PACT program, but they are going to a local community college, they're going to be paying for those classes out of pocket or using federal student loans. And so could this still support those students? I know, I say that because I know that many programs often use federal Pell Grant eligibility when they're considering need as the threshold. But there are lots of students that demonstrate financial need that fall just outside of that range, but have incredibly high needs still.
Well, I would just to clarify, many of the Promise programs across the country are really focused on tuition, not necessarily the total cost of education. So if you put in the total cost of education, you really can't go to college just focused on tuition, because that's only half the bill, so to speak. So
Right.
we focus on total cost of education, as opposed to just that. So it depends on what you're putting in that cost bucket.
Right. Yep, certainly.
And Catherine, one of the ideas that's been thrown out, and again, we're still early in this, but one of the ideas that's been thrown out is that every student in Connecticut under that program would get something, and that there maybe be a tiered element to this based on need, but that everybody would get something. Because we know there are many, not just barely outside of Pell eligibility, but significantly outside of Pell eligibility that still have significant need when they look in terms of college costs and the overall costs. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great idea. I think that, that goes to what I'm saying, right? Which is that just because on paper, based on the student aid index, based on the family's adjusted gross income, does not only, those are not the only students with some demonstrated financial need, right? So I think that's a great idea.
Mona?
Other comments, please? Go. Oh, sorry, Kelvin.
No, it's Mona has her hand up.
Thanks. So about need and everybody getting something.
We're talking about the
dear.
Connecticut promise now. We're not talking about what the school with higher eds would bring to the table, I don't think.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking, so if it's, I'll just share this and then I'm probably reacting prematurely, so I'll wait, as we continue our work. But so if we decide it will be need-based, then we're going to have to define need, federal methodology, institutional methodology, whatever. In that scenario, some students will be determined to have no need. And so if we say it's need-based, but everybody gets something, we can't say it's need-based. So anyway, so that's that. I have, lots more to say, but at another time.
Mona, you're in good company. None of us really know how to talk about this just yet. Okay, we're all just trying to figure it out.
Okay, good stuff.
Well, what I would say again is, I think, for instance, there are only a couple of times when we could not give our scholarship because the total cost of education was met. So I don't think any promise program anywhere in the country is going to go over that total cost of education, meaning if it's 55,000, if it's 60,000, and after you add everything in the pot, it's over, then one of those scholarships or sources are going to be turned back. So I think then that comes down to, are we talking about last dollar? Probably we are talking about last dollar because I don't know any statewide promise program that is middle dollar. So yeah, it depends on what the variables are.
Right, and I think
Yeah.
no, to that point, Patricia and Mona, thank you for that. I think what you're speaking to is what are the operating guardrails, right? And we have yet to define those. I mean, that is the conversation we're having, and so it's great that you're bringing it up because that is there's some operational assumptions here that we have to take into account, and we are in the process of having exactly these conversations. So, welcome all.
And two more statements, but in like 30 seconds. So I'm less concerned about students who receive so much financial aid that, if this were need-based, we wouldn't be able to layer on the benefit without taking away another benefit. I'm more concerned about those who just either won't have any financial need, and then we'd have to say, you can't, we're going to have to require them to file a form that some of them may not want to file in today's political climate, so that we have an official calculation of need. And so anyway, we've got lots of time to talk about this stuff, but just wanted to say I'm less concerned about those who have many sources of money coming to help with the educational expenses, you know, because there are fewer of those students, more of the other.
Right. Because when we think about this Connecticut Promise, and again, learning from the field, it really starts with the funnel, and the funnel is everybody's in, and then you start putting certain guidelines or guardrails in place, and that funnel comes down. And no state has an inordinate amount of money to budget for this. So that's where, once again, even after we define certain characteristics, we still have to then align it to what a budget would look like. And that's just not going to be everyone.
Of course. Yep.
Just to throw out one other thought as we talk about Connecticut schools, right? So coming from having moved here from Georgia, which has a Hope Scholarship program and another program for students with a slightly lower GPA, that is funding that's available if you go to a Georgia school. Right? And so there's also this potential of thinking about, as we're thinking all things, right, for what a statewide program would look like, is there something that either is graduated like higher if you stay in state, or something that is just for in-state that then incentivizes students at any income level to be thinking about going to in-state schools, and et cetera. So it's just another, there are many facets to think about, and in terms of what a statewide thing that might get support would look like, that's different from how individual promise programs currently are done, where that's an assessment of what the current situation is and need, et cetera. So similar, but still, it's really important to be to look at differences, and it's why I've also mentioned to Richard, I'm not sure that I would call it the same terminology, because we're not looking at replacing, we're looking at it enhancing or another program, right? And so thinking about that.
Mhm. By calling it promise, it implies certain things. And a state promise may not be all of those things. Is that part of what you're saying, Siobhan?
Yes.
Yep. It's a really important point. I don't want to get in the way if other people have other comments here, but I want to try to just use our last few minutes to look forward. But any other comments? These are all very helpful, and these are the things that are going to contribute to, this very complex system that we have called higher education. And we're going to try to take all the complexities and understand the complexities, but try to develop and deliver a more simple, digestible set of recommendations here. But we need to understand all these complexities in order to get there. So thank you for that. Just in the last few minutes, and Kelvin, I want to please add on to this, but I just want to talk a little bit about looking ahead. So we have a couple of more task force meetings that are on the schedule, on the radar, later in November and then into December. Between now and that last meeting in December, and we also had an additional meeting that we plugged on there. I believe it's December 10th. I'm not looking at the calendar, but I think it's December 10th. If we need that additional time, the timeline here for our work is that we're able to present a report to the legislature by the beginning of January. And it may not be the very 1st of January, but certainly the first week in January. We are, just so you all know, Kelvin and I are communicating with Derek Slapp and Greg Haddad, trying to keep them up to date and get their input as we go forward. So they're also informing the work. And we're trying to meet with other folks, as Kelvin mentioned, in terms of the providing us with additional research information and data that is also informing and guiding the work. I think what we would hope to do is to have at least a draft report. I'm using the term draft loosely here, but a draft report by the beginning of December, by our last meeting that we have on the calendar, that we would all have had a draft report to look at, weigh in on, and contribute to. It will be important from this point forward. Again, we're not going to be thinking in terms of the work groups. We're going to be thinking in terms of the task force as one. As we share information with you all, for you all to please share comments, share suggestions, share additional wording and language and or details to make sure that the draft report that we share back with you all incorporates as much of that as possible. Okay. And then during December, have time to continue to maybe fine tune that and share that back with you all to make sure, again, that it reflects the thinking of the group and all of the contributions of the group, so that we can deliver that by that first week in January. Does that make sense to everybody? Does that hold up for everybody? Kelvin, you want to add to that though?
Yeah, just briefly. Thank you for that, Richard. You have access and copies of the documents, right? So, in particularly the one that I'm working on with the team, feel free to go through the document and make comments in the document, turn on the feedback function there, and send it back my way. Or if you don't want to do that, send me an email, whatever format you have a preference of communicating, please do so, because I will take that information and reflect it and keep note of it and figure out a way, if it makes sense, if it adds on. In any case, there will be a conversation to make sure that we're honoring your feedback in the process.
Anything else before we sign off today? Parting thoughts?
Just one question. Are we thinking so let's say everything's great, this goes through, we have a State of Connecticut Promise program. If students live in a city or town that has an existing program, they would remain part of their city or city program. Is that correct? And then
Correct.
For all others in a town or city without a program, we're imagining they would have access to the statewide program.
Yes, I think that's important, Mona. We would not want this to interfere with, undermine in any way existing Promise programs. It's intended to be an additional, right? An additional thing, but that's an important consideration what you're raising there. Yeah.
Okay, thanks so much.
Yeah. I just add one brief item here is that, in my experience of having put these types of reports together in the past, so we're probably going to use even that last meeting that we said we may or may not need. I'm gonna, lean in the direction and say we probably will need that meeting at the end, just based on the fact that even understanding the financial element of this will be complex within itself, and we want to give you time to digest. And so, we may have to, for that last decision element, it may take form via email or some other means, or we may have to call for a brief, Zoom meeting just to make sure that we are transparent in our process and our intent. But just know that Richard and I are incredibly committed to try to meet the legislative deadline that is a statutory and obligation to us. So thank you.
Yeah. So again, the next meeting that we have on the calendar is the 19th of November at noon. That's a Zoom. We then have a meeting the 3rd of December at noon. I think we said we would try to do that in person, at least our initial thoughts. And then the auxiliary meeting, which again, I think we're going to have to use, is that December 10th, also at noon. So just want to make sure everybody has those meetings on their calendar, and a lot of work to be done between now and then.
Just one question. So Kelvin, you're sharing our document with the other group so that they can comment. And will the other group be sharing their documents with us so we
We
can?
did, we did that already. We shared that over the last couple of days. You have everybody now has each of the work groups documents. Yeah,
Is it in a Google or?
it was
Is-
sent as attachments.
Oh, okay. You might want to put
Megan,
Google, 'cause then-
Megan sent the attachments along with the, I think the calendar invite. Am I right, Megan? Am I saying that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for your good work, attention, time. Deeply appreciated. And here we go. Onward.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.